Okay, everyone, it is exactly 11 a.m., so we'll go ahead and get started on things today as far as our webinar is concerned around phishing attacks and some of the different coronavirus scams that we are seeing out there. I want to start off just by, of course, thanking everyone for joining us today. We truly appreciate the opportunity to have this discussion with you. The purpose of today's webinar is really to provide some best practices when it comes to phishing attacks and what you can do to protect yourself. Getting things started here, excuse me. I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Chris Montgomery. I am the Director of Sales at ThrottleNet. With me today, I have George Rosenthal, our company president, and he's essentially going to be kind of administering our presentation as well as recording it for future reference. And then I also have AJ Rogers with us, and she's going to be monitoring our question and answer board. In addition, I'd like to outline a few guidelines today to ensure the timeliest presentation possible, as I realize your time is important. First, if you have a question, please feel free to enter it using the Q&A button and enter your question there. You're going to see that at the very bottom of your screen, depending on how it's oriented. In the interest of time, we're going to refrain from answering any questions until the end of the webinar. Now, you'll also notice that there's a chat button as well as a raise your hand button at the bottom. However, we ask that you refrain from using these buttons unless there's a specific need to do so, such as not being able to hear me or not being able to see the slides for some reason. We'll also be posting this webinar along with any questions to ThrottleNet.com/webinars for future reference. So again, thank you so much for giving us some of your time today. We truly appreciate it, and hopefully you benefit from some of the items that we'll be reviewing this morning. And getting things kicked off, we're going to be reviewing social engineering, what it is. We're also going to be talking about how to identify a phishing attack, as well as providing some examples. We'll be reviewing some of the coronavirus scams that we've seen thus far. And then finally, we'll take a few moments just to outline how ThrottleNet can be of assistance and help your organization. But first, did you know that there has been a 667% increase in phishing attacks amid the coronavirus outbreak? This is why we're doing this today, to at least provide ways you can identify and protect against these scams, especially given the fact that most of your users, or a large number, are working from home or working in some remote capacity. Now, got a quick question for everyone today. This question is really going to be, how many of our attendees today have actually experienced a phishing attack? So I'm going to throw this poll up here, give everybody a moment to give me some votes on this. So take a look, tell me what you see. We'll give about 30 seconds here. We'll end our polling and we'll see what the results are. Okay. So I don't think 30 seconds is necessarily required, but it looks to me, as we end our polling here, that we had about 86% of our participants today have actually experienced a phishing attack, with 14% showing that they have not. So again, not too bad. Doesn't surprise me though. I think these days most people have had some experience with a phishing attack in some way, shape, or form. So in moving on, let's start today about talking about the typical attacks that most are familiar with, as well as some you may not be. But in order to do so, we need to establish what social engineering is, as well as the overarching term, or I should say, as this is the overarching term used for phishing attacks. Now, social engineering is the use of deception to manipulate individuals into divulging confidential or personal information that may be used for fraudulent purposes. Now, on the surface, of course, that sounds great, but what does that actually mean? So I'd like to provide some examples of what social engineering might look like. So some might include somebody calls you at work and they claim to be from your IT help desk, requesting your username and password because they're applying some updates and patches. However, you're busy and you just want to get them off the phone, so you give it to them, but you really haven't confirmed or verified they were, in fact, who they said they were. Another example might be someone leaving a company thumb drive in the parking lot with malware installed on it. An unsuspecting employee sees it, picks it up, plugs it into a PC, to find out who it belongs to. But again, in so doing, if there is a malware, some sort of malware loaded on that thumb drive, as soon as they plug that into the PC, that PC has been compromised. And then one other one that I see quite often might be you work in a large secure office building in which you only know your immediate team members. An individual approaches the building, they've got their hands full, and they ask you to hold the door because they can't reach their access card. So you do so without realizing they aren't really authorized to be there in the first place, but now they've gained access to the facility and have free reign. So given these examples, social engineering really, in its most common form, is really taking advantage of human curiosity or a desire to be helpful for fraudulent purposes. The iteration of social engineering we'll be reviewing today, of course, is phishing, as this has all the traits commonly associated with any type of social engineering attack. So, and get into that, what exactly is a phishing attack? So a phishing attack is a type of social engineering often used to steal user data, including login credentials and credit card numbers. Now, it occurs when an attacker masquerading as a trusted entity dupes a victim into opening an email, instant message, or text message, and the recipient is then tricked into clicking a malicious link, which can lead to the installation of malware, the freezing of the system as part of the ransomware attack, or the revealing of sensitive information. So now that we've established what social engineering is, as well as what a phishing attack is, let's review exactly how to identify one. So no matter the phishing attack, they typically have a few telltale signs you can use to identify whether or not your email is or is not a phishing attack, including an odd from address. For example, this might be an address that appears to be okay, but it's from an unknown sender. Now, one way to check to ensure the email is from who it says it's from is simply to hover over the address, as this will show if this is a spoof email or not. The way it does this is by showing the actual sender's address as opposed to the one listed. So when you do this, for what it's worth, there are times that you may have to actually go in and click when you hover. There will be a place where you can click on the email address and then it will show it. It won't always necessarily just show it directly on screen. But again, that is one way to go about it. So an example of this would be if I sent an email to you, it would show as chris@throttlenet.com as both of the addresses, as the address listed, as well as the address listed when you hover over my name. However, if this were a malicious attack, the address shown when hovering would differ from the one showing. In the case of the previous example, instead of reading chris@throttlenet.com when you hover over it, it would show something like john@hackersrus.com. And of course, if you see something like that, that is malicious, and you definitely want to avoid it at all costs, delete it, get rid of it altogether. Now, another way that used to be more effective is to look for unprofessional punctuation or grammar. Now, I say this used to be more effective since cybercriminals have gotten much better at creating these and have figured out that it must look like it's coming from someone here in the US. There's almost always a link or an attachment to of some kind, which is typically how the ransomware virus is introduced to the compromised party. And finally, there's typically a statement that creates a sense of urgency, such as if action isn't taken by, something bad will happen, such as funds won't be deposited in your account access, or your account access may be cut off altogether. So let's take a look at some examples of different phishing attacks that we've seen over the years. Now, the first example is one I received several years ago, but it really still holds true today. Now, in this case, they're claiming I have funds pending transfer and need to approve said transfer prior to said funds being released. Of course, I want to get my money as fast as possible, but I also recognize that I would probably know if money was coming my way. So that said, clicking on the attachment I'm supposed to approve this will most likely result in a malware infection being perpetrated on my PC. Now, in the example on screen now, it's obvious this is malicious in nature. It's clearly from overseas, given the language it's written in, so why am I showing it? The reason is that this illustrates why it's so hard to block these. In the case of the example above, you'll notice that the from address includes numbers. This is why this example is so challenging to block using your spam filter. As soon as you block 8733.com.cn, they'll resend it as 8734.com.cn and so on and so forth. Now, I tried blocking this for months, probably for the better part of a year, And then one day, honestly, it just stopped. But I never had any success in completely blocking it due to the naming convention of the domain itself and the fact that numbers can go on for all eternity and infinity. Now, in this example, the cyber criminal is acting as if he's the CEO of our company in an attempt to get the user to take action. We've seen this same tactic used for everything from Starbucks to Apple gift cards. Now, these attacks have also become a little more savvy since they now ask the recipient not call them because they are in meetings all day. The reason they are doing this is because calling to confirm is really one of the simplest and easy ways to ensure that this email is actually who it says it's from. Now, remember this going forward. If you suspect that it's malicious in nature, always call that person to confirm. Just make sure, of course, there's no harm in doing so. It's not going to make anybody look stupid or anything along those lines. It's simply going to ensure that you guys are not a victim of a malware attack. And before moving on, I also wanted to point out something that typically slips past people when it comes to these types of attacks. Now, if you note the from address, at first glance, it appears to be from @throttlenet.com, spelled THROTTLENET.com. But upon closer inspection, you'll notice it's actually from @ThrottleNet, spelled THROTTELNET.com. Now, if you've ever played that game where the first and last letter were correct, but the rest of the letters in between were jumbled, you know how this works. I mean, essentially our minds fill in what we think we should see and not what we actually see. And while this is a great way to get through the day a lot faster, as it serves as a mental shortcut, in this example, it could also be a problem. So the point is, just take a moment to make sure that your eyes are not playing tricks on you, as I've seen this as being one of the key ways that malware infections and phishing attacks are conducted. And it's a simple just double check and just making sure that it is who it says it's from and that it's just not some very similar domain name, so to speak. Now, this example is similar to the last, except in this case, they haven't asked you to do anything yet. They are simply trying to get you to engage in discussion with them, and eventually, once they've earned your trust, instructions will follow, and then from there, they'll outline how they would like you to move the money or how they'd like to procure gift cards and how you'd remit those back to them for whatever reasons or purposes they plan on using them. So, other things to avoid, of course, would be clicking on unsolicited links in emails. Now, a simple way to do this would be to view the email in plain text without those links being active or live, as this eliminates any potential for clicking on those links and creating any problem on the back end. Now, and speaking of that, this is especially true today, considering the number of emails that we are all getting for shipments and deliveries, given the current circumstance and most people being in the under a stay-at-home order. Now, cyber criminals have become very good at spoofing the emails of legitimate companies such as UPS, Federal Express, and United States Postal Service. Now, if you receive an unexpected, or for that matter, even expected email from any of these delivery companies, or any others for that matter, we would encourage you to go to their site directly as opposed to clicking on the tracking link in the actual email or in an attachment, as the link itself may download malicious content in the background. And this also applies heavily to your financial institutions as well. If you receive a text or an email with a link to log into your bank, don't click on it. Simply go to the institution's website directly and log in from there. Okay. So before we continue talking about a few other things, I wanted to throw another poll question out there for everybody. So we're going to pull that up, find out who knows what a zero-day virus is. So we're going to launch this up there and let it go for a few minutes. I've given you guys some choices here. Hopefully it's pretty straightforward and self-explanatory, but we'll see. Quick answers so far. Right. Give it another minute or so, or another couple of seconds here to see what we come up with. Okay, I like these answers though. So what we found is nobody thinks it's coronavirus part 2, but about half the room said, or better, that a virus that didn't exist yesterday but does today. And then we had a small percentage that said a virus that doesn't know there are 7 days in the week. So we'll go ahead and end our polling here, and we will give some general ideas on what exactly that is. So what a zero-day virus is a virus, which is also known as a zero-day malware or next-generation malware, is a previously unknown computer virus or other malware for which specific antivirus software signatures are not yet available. I mention this because it illustrates one of the biggest vulnerabilities in your antivirus solution: definitions and updates. If your antivirus solution is not completely up to date, and since it's only as intelligent as what it's told, it may not stop a virus or malware infection from coming through, since it may not recognize it as being malicious. Now, this is why it is so important to use a robust and, most importantly, up-to-date antivirus, anti-malware, anti-spyware solution. And we would also encourage you always to use the paid version of that solution, if at all possible, as opposed to the free version that might come with your desktop or PC. Those will still offer some protections, but they're not going to be nearly as robust as the paid variation might be. And one of the last methods we're going to cover today is how cyber criminals act as tech support for Microsoft. Now, I've personally had this scam conducted on me or attempted on me at least twice over the last few years. And in the case of this scam, the cyber criminals they claim that they're from Microsoft tech support, and they state that your PC is having problems and they are the heroes coming to save the day and fix the issue. Now, if you know anything about Microsoft tech support, you know that you typically sit on hold for hours when calling, and in some cases need to schedule a time for support to help stem the amount of calls coming in. I mention this because there's no way Microsoft is so far ahead in their call queue that they're calling you directly for support. Now, the way this scam works is the malicious party convinces the user that they are from Microsoft and notice that their PC is producing bad packets of information. From there, they'll gain remote access to the PC with the user's assistance. And once they're in, they'll move around some files and folders on your screen so that the user thinks they're either trying to identify or fixing the problem, and then they'll claim that they have found it, but that they require $150 to fix the problem itself. The user then provides them with the credit card information to get this fixed, and the cyber criminal, of course, goes to work on fixing the non-existent problem. Now, when this is all said and done, they not only have your credit card information, but they may have also installed malware or spyware in your PC to conduct future attacks or to monitor keystrokes for usernames and passwords. So the takeaway here is, if you ever get a call from Microsoft or some unknown tech support agency, just hang up. It is most likely a scam call. And again, they've been doing this for years. What I will say is, on a positive, is that I do know some of the call centers that were conducting these types of attacks have since been caught, and in most cases, those individuals have been arrested. So for what it's worth, hopefully we won't see too many more of these in the future, but they do still exist, and you can find multiple examples on YouTube of how these scams actually work. So this concludes our portion around what to look for and how to avoid becoming a victim of a phishing attack, just based on best practices out there. So let's talk a little bit about some of the methods that cyber criminals are using specific to the current pandemic and the coronavirus. So let's start off by talking about a term that, quite frankly, prior to doing the research for today's webinar, I had never heard before, which is coronavirus and infodemic. So what exactly is an infodemic? Well, again, we're going to ask the question to see if folks know what one happens to be. So I throw up our poll question there. If I could get folks just to give me some feedback on that, if we know what an infodemic is. I think it's pretty straightforward. We'll see what we come up with here. So far, I think it's pretty obvious to most of our attendees today exactly what an infodemic is, but we'll talk about it here in a moment. Okay. So we will go ahead and end our polling, and what I'll tell you is 100% of our participants today knew what an infodemic was. So for those that did not participate in the poll and are just listening along, an infodemic is when people are bombarded with an overabundance of both accurate and inaccurate information, thus making it extremely hard to know who to trust. I think these days that cannot be overstated enough as to what you're seeing out there online and through different resources and media that are out there talking about this and trying to keep it in the public eye. So the primary way an infodemic is caused, though, is when hackers capitalize on the confusion by sending out emails that purport to offer things like health advice, cures, and these are actually phishing attacks in disguise. So what are some examples of exactly how people are perpetrating these types of scams and compromising their networks? So one such scam that we're seeing right now is what's called a smishing attack. So for those that aren't aware, these are attacks conducted via text as opposed to email. Now, an example of this type of phishing attack would be a message claiming to be from local, state, or federal agency, stating there's going to be a national quarantine with a link to more information. Needless to say, the malicious actor would like you to click on the link within the text message, which results in your phone becoming infected. Now, that's just a very high-level overview of it, but what we are going to do here in a few minutes is we'll get in more detail about this later in our presentation and ways that a simple way you can protect yourself against smishing attacks. Another method cyber criminals are using to attract users is via websites. Now, as you can see here, as reported by MarketWatch, coronavirus-related website name registrations are 50% more likely, to be from malicious actors. There are a few key examples of this, such as those handy coronavirus tracking websites showing the number of infections, recoveries, and deaths. These are great tools to keep track of this information, as well as to see if your immediate area is affected. However, they can be malicious in nature. It's also difficult to determine which is which, since the fancy graphic is so appealing, but also something that a cyber criminal would use to get your attention. So if this is something you'd like to track, because I think all of us have an interest in this right now, we'd encourage you to check out Johns Hopkins University, as they have a very informative yet safe tracking site. So going out to their website, you will see some links to that, and we would encourage you to track all the information there. Again, we know this is a trusted site, and it's getting a lot of traction and visits these days. The impending stimulus checks are another way that cyber criminals are using to conduct phishing attacks. They're sending something similar to the example shown earlier in our How Do We Avoid and Identify Phishing Attacks segment, along with a link or an attachment saying they require your information to process your stimulus check. Now, if you receive an email like this, we would encourage you to delete it, as the methods the government will use to remit payment may or may not include that at this point in time. A lot of that stuff is still being worked out. I actually was online this morning doing some research prior to our webinar today and found that they're still figuring out how they're even going to assess all of this. So if you receive an email in the interim until there are very definitive guidelines given on how they're going to be remitting payment to everyone for the stimulus checks, don't click on any email links. And it could be that this may not involve email at all. We may not be getting that information from the government or the IRS in that way. So another way, of course, is via websites claiming to have a cure for the virus. However, we would ask that you always defer to local, state, or federal agencies for this information, as a number of people have not only been impacted by these sites, but have caused themselves unnecessary harm by following the cures that are listed. So again, if it's not from a trusted source, such as the CDC or your physician, you really should not follow it. We would heavily advise against doing so. Then, of course, and I started seeing these surface in my inbox on Monday of this week, and I've gotten a couple of others since then, are those sites that claim to have a warehouse full of personal protective equipment, otherwise known as PPE. Thus far, I've seen these mostly coming from China. However, there will be in time those that will become from the U.S. or will at least appear to be coming from the U.S. So again, if you get an email like this, do not click on anything contained within. Don't click on any links or attachments, because doing so, of course, is going to result in some problems in most cases. So again, avoid them at all costs. And as we touched on earlier, even your phone is susceptible to attack. So one such example is COVID lock. It claimed to help users chart the virus only to lock their devices for ransom. So in this case, An easy way, very easy way to protect against this is simply to password protect your phone. We would encourage you to also install apps that are only from the Google Play Store, as these reduce the likelihood of them being malicious in nature. I didn't read, quite honestly, a lot about iPhones and whether or not they are susceptible to attacks like this. I know that when you talk in terms of the Android camp versus the Apple camp, there's kind of a war there of platforms. But as I've said, so far, since Android offers a little bit more of some open source and beta applications, I'm sure that has a lot to do with this, whereas Apple is very much locks down what their apps can do and who they get their apps from. You have to go through a pretty stringent test to put those in their app store. So, and then last but certainly not least is the use of charity sites pretending to be legitimate organizations. So what are some best practices related to checking to make sure that when you donate, you can donate with confidence? So two great websites that you can go to check this out are going to be guidewire.org and give.org, and search the name of your charity there before you donate. They will tell you very specifically how the charity is rated, if they are a legitimate charity at all, et cetera, et cetera. So it saves you a lot of the trouble and headache of wondering if you are actually donating to a charity or an actual real charity as opposed to a scam. Now, if you're on Facebook, you click on the About section of the Facebook group, and you can see there if that group name has changed multiple times to reflect whatever a new national crisis may be going on. This is a sure sign this group is trolling for an audience rather than promoting reliable news. And then keep an eye on official sources on Twitter, including the accounts of trusted news sites and different reporters. Again, a lot of times this will provide you additional information for your local area if you're following your local news broadcasts, or again, on a national level, depending on what news source you choose to view daily. And then if the site claims to be from the government, check to make sure that it's using a .gov domain or .gov. If it doesn't, this is not a government site and should not be trusted, okay? I actually watched, again, as part of my research this morning, they talked about the World Health Organization as well as the federal government, and the fact that protocols, when those were originally established for email, they were not, the protocols that were put in place were not really thought through very well. It doesn't relate so much to the domain name as far as a website is concerned. However, where it does come into play is really ensuring you're not getting spoof emails. And again, that comes back to the importance that if you get an email from the government or appears to be from the government, even with a .gov domain, or if you get something directly from the World Health Organization, that you want to hover over it, drill down, and make sure it's actually who it says it's from, because again, it could be a spoof email on the back end. In a large part, that's just due to how things were originally set up and structured when some of those exchange and hosting environments were put in place years ago. So that concludes two sections: phishing attacks, how to identify them and avoid them, as well as some of the different coronavirus scams you should be on the outlook for. So in moving on, we're just going to cover a few last items around how ThrottleNet helps mitigate the risk associated with these areas and these different things we've discussed today. So one way that we've been able to help a lot of organizations is through a solution that we use called Third Wall. And what this allows us to do is install folders in your user's My Documents file that we monitor at all times. In the event the file becomes encrypted, this will send a notification to our team in addition to quarantining the PC from the rest of the network, prevent it from spreading, and in turn, encrypting your entire network. This has come in attacks and ensuring it doesn't propagate out any further from just a single PC within one of our networks. Now, if you're one of our managed network clients, of which we have many, this service will be included along with a robust antivirus, anti-malware, and anti-spyware solution that we monitor and maintain for you in real time. And those that aren't familiar, Managed Network is where ThrottleNet serves as your full-time IT department by providing maintenance, monitoring, and management of your network, in addition to a fully staffed help desk and dedicated team of IT professionals. Now, if managed services isn't for you, We then recommend our workstation, remote maintenance monitoring, antivirus combination, as well as what we call our server safeguard. This, at a bare minimum, ensures your machines are protected, that they're being updated and patched on a regular basis, that they're sending notifications and alerts in the event of an issue taking place. And then finally, and as a last line of defense, a solid backup solution will ensure that if you are compromised, you have viable backups to work from. Now, ThrottleNet offers what we call business continuity and disaster recovery solutions, such as Datto, that ensure minimum downtime is put in place. This solution does this by allowing users to work from a local backup appliance in the event the server has been compromised. And if the entire building were to be destroyed by a natural disaster, the solution also allows your users to work directly from your cloud backup and Datto's hosting environment until such time as your local network is back up and operational again. Now, this solution alone has saved our clients almost $3 million in ransoms since 2018 by allowing them to restore from a point prior to the attack taking place. Now, granted, depending on how often your backups occur, you could lose up to a few hours worth of data, but most likely you're not going to lose an entire week, an entire month, or an entire year's worth of data. You're just going to restore from a point prior to this attack taking place and working from that point going forward. So again, this mitigates the risk associated with all this and pretty much kills any possibility of you having to remit payment to some sort of a ransomware attack. So this concludes our webinar today. We've gone over a variety of different items around phishing attacks, coronavirus scams, and how ThrottleNet can help. So I'm going to defer to AJ to see if we had any questions that came in through our discussion today. However, as I look at it, it looks like we only really had one that came in, and it looks like that has been answered at this point. So the question that we had was, will the slides be available after the webinar? For those that are listening, they most definitely will be. We would encourage you to check those slides out at throttlenet.com/webinars. So I just want to end by, again, thanking everybody for their time today, as well as for joining us. And as we stated at the beginning of this call, again, you can always check it out at throttlenet.com/webinars. And if you would like us to send you a list of best practices to avoid phishing attacks, please feel free to email us at webinars@throttlenet.com, or we will also have those documents available in a PDF form, again, at throttlenet.com/webinars. So again, we thank you so much for your time today. We truly appreciate it. We hope everybody is staying happy or healthy and doing the best they can under the circumstances. And I will just leave you with this: wash your hands. So I appreciate everybody's time today and look forward to speaking with you next time at our next webinar. Thank you so much.